These strategies are what we call study techniques. If you ask students how they study, most of them use some sort of form of rehearsal studying, repeating the information over and over again, rewriting notes, rereading the textbook, re-listening to videos, right? Rehearsal is a form of studying, and it can help get information into memory. There are better ways to rehearse, and there are worse ways to rehearse. Overall, though, it turns out that rehearsal is one of the worst strategies that you can use. The absolute worst strategy you can use is what's called massed rehearsal, which is where you cram, right? We've all experienced this. We cram for a test, and it turns out that, that information can get in there, and we might be able to retrieve it for a test, but any time passes by, it's gone. Right? On the other hand, what's called spaced or interleaved is where we study a little bit each day over time. So if the people are going to study for the same amount of time, say 4 hours for an exam, and one person studies 4 hours on Sunday, the night before the exam, another person studies 1 hour a night 4 days prior to the exam, the person who spaced it out does consistently better. We see this in multiple studies. Testing effects is another part of rehearsal, which is if you're going to rely on rehearsal, you should also use some sort of form of active testing. If you test yourself on your knowledge, you perform better. That's part of the point of the weekly quizzes in this class. It's a way to test yourself on your knowledge. But the more active you are in your rehearsal, the more spaced out and planned it is, the better it is. But there are a lot of other strategies we can use to get information into our brains. One that a lot of people are familiar with, even if they don't know it, its name is called chunking, which is where we combine information into chunks to make it easier to remember. So a credit card number of 16 digits becomes difficult to remember, but if we chunk them into 4 groups of 4 numbers, it's easier to remember. We do that with phone numbers all the time, right? So chunking is a way of combining information together to decrease the total amount we have to learn. Mnemonic devices, right, like PEMDAS, the order of operations, parentheses, exponential, division, subtraction, right? The Roy G. Biv for the colors of the rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, right? Roy G. Biv. Right? There are all kinds of mnemonic devices you've probably run into that help you out. Sometimes these can be stories, right? Like when trying to differentiate between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. I always talk about needing a parachute if you fall out of an airplane because it slows you down. A parachute slows you down. The parasympathetic nervous system slows you down, right? These are form of mnemonic devices. They center around this idea of semantic processing, of providing meaning to things. I find logos fascinating because most of the time logos for big businesses reduce their information content over time. If we look at the original Starbucks to the one now, Pepsi, what you'll notice with Starbucks, Pepsi, and Apple is they used to have to tell you what they did, who they were, and what they did. Now there's very little semantic information associated with them. Except for Burger King, for some reason. But we now look at this and we can apply meaning to these symbols, right? That's a form of semantic processing, is applying meaning to things. The deeper we go with that, the more we dive in and try to find relationships between things, the better our retrieval will be. In this example, the poor monkey does not look very happy in the deep water, but I'll tell you this, you'll be much happier the deeper you process your memories. Shallow processing means shallow retrieval. Deep processing means deeper retrieval. That means when you're doing things like rehearsing or studying, not just memorizing single terms, but finding connections between them. Like many students might use something like flashcards. And flashcards can be effective, but I say change the game up a little bit. If all you do is pull up a word and memorize the definition, that's shallow processing. But instead, throw down 2 or 3 flashcards at once. And then try to not only know what those terms mean, but tell the connections between them, right? If you're throwing terms from the chapters or from the units down at random, there are always connections between them. And by trying to struggle to find the connections between those ideas, you're going to develop a deeper understanding of it, and it's going to encode better, and it's going to retrieve better, and most importantly, you're likely to remember it for much longer, potentially the rest of your life. Another way that really helps with processes is what we call self-reference. Self-reference is when we can make material relate to ourselves. Right? The more we see how material relates to ourselves, the more we understand its relation to ourselves, the more likely we are to encode it in a meaningful way, and the much easier it will be to retrieve. Right? So anytime you're trying to study, anytime you're trying to get something in memory, think about how it relates to you and your life.